3 of the lesson, and actually this is the last of the review for this unit. Okay, cosine law. Cosine law also has two forms. Now in this case, these two forms are used in two different ways. The first one is used to find a side length. So you want to make sure that on your help sheet that when you have this formula down that you're actually saying that this is for a side length. Okay, now the other one then is obviously for something other than a side length, and it's for an angle. And for some reason that didn't want to come up for me, so to find an angle. Okay, so it's important that you use the one for the side and one for the angle. Otherwise, you're going to have to do an awful lot of rearranging of your equations. The other thing that's really important for you to realize too has to do with here it is here, has to do with the location. If I'm finding side A, I need to have the cos of A. If I'm finding the cos of A, I need to be subtracting A. So in most cases, if students are going to mess up, it's going to be with that, and especially with this one here. So when we do an example for that one, I'll point that out again for you because that is probably one of the trick parts with this. So this two formulas again, it's just using a formula but making sure that you're following order of operations as well. So you can use the cosine law if you have one of the following situations. First of all, if you know two sides and an included angle. So this is that Pac-Man situation that we talked about before. Remember in the lesson I literally had a Pac-Man running across the screen. So Pac-Man situation, two sides and the angle holding them together. That's the included angle. Or you can use the cosine law if you know all three sides of the triangle. And in that case, if you know all three sides, really what you're doing is you're actually using this form of the equation. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples here. Okay, and we're going to look at the first one. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this one out of the way for a second and then I'll put it back. So here it is. It says find the indicated variable. So in here I'm finding x. Now, why can I use cosine law? Well, it says if I know all three sides. Well, obviously I'm finding a side, so I don't know all three sides. But the first situation says that if I know two sides. So some of you have already realized when you looked at it, well, these two ticks and these two ticks here tell me that those two side lengths are the same. So in fact, what I really have here is I have this side over here is also 15 centimeters. So it creates that Pac-Man situation again. So I'm finding side x. So, and I'm finding a side, so it means I'm going to be using the first version of the formula. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write down the first version. I'm going to do it underneath so that I'm saving paper on the other side. Okay, so here's the formula. And I want to find side A. Notice again, I do not have anything labeled here, but I can easily do that. If I'm interested in finding x, that means that this is capital A, because this needs to be little a. And then the other ones, it doesn't really matter, B and C. So this is little b and this is little c. Taking that couple seconds just to actually label your triangle with those letters is going to make a huge difference to you when you're actually substituting things in. Okay, so let's take and actually fill in the information that we know. So a squared equals b, which is 15 here. So I have 15 squared plus c squared, which is 15 as well. And then I have minus 2 times 15 times another 15, which is also 15 squared, and then the cos of 20. Now this is where the problem happens with students. You've filled in your formula, but if you don't follow order of operations, you're going to get the wrong answer. So you can, if you're using one of the graphing calculators, it's just as easy to type the whole thing in and you'll get the right answer. But if you're not going to use the graphing calculator, literally calculate things. So what is 15 squared? Some of you already know that that's what that's going to be. I was going to tell you, but I'm not going to. So 225 plus 225. So up comes this again. So 225 plus 225. And then I have minus 2 times 15 times close to 20. So this whole thing together I have to type into my calculator. Okay, so that whole thing, because everything there is being multiplied. In order of operations tells me that all of that has to be multiplied together. So I'm going to enter a negative 2 times 15 times 15 times the cos of 20. And I'm going to get a decimal, and I have a negative number as well. So I have negative 422. Oops, sorry about that. Negative 422 decimal, and I'm not very good at remembering my decimals. 862. 862. Now, obviously, the more decimal places I keep, the more accurate I'm going to be. So if you want to use more, go right ahead. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to then finish this because now it's just adding and subtracting. Now, because I already have that on my screen, I'm going to leave it there and I'm just going to add 225 plus 225. Okay. Now the reason I did those rather than entering 450, just so that you understand that each one of those has to be added. And when we hit enter, we end up with 27.1. So 27.1. Now, if I look at this, that's telling me that this is 27.1. That doesn't seem very realistic to me. And guess what? It's not, because that is a squared. So in order to find a, I have to take the square root of my 27.1. So don't forget that. Otherwise, your answer is going to be way too large. And so let's do that. So I'm going to do the square root of 27.1. And again, I only kept one decimal place, so I'm not as accurate. So 5.2 is my answer. And in this case, you'll notice that in 5.2, I think I said, I forgot already. This time they have told me that the side lengths are centimeters, so that means I have to put centimeters in my answer. Okay, so you don't want to lose communication marks over something like that. Okay, so that is to find a side length. The next one that we're going to look at is to find an angle. So it's going to come over here. I'll switch to a different color. Now when I look at this one, and I'm going to blow it up just a tiny bit, you can see that I know all three sides. I have no other trigonometric property to find an angle other than the cosine law. So I'm going to take the cosine line to find it. So again, I can label this however I so wish. But the first thing I'm going to do is I think I'm going to clone our equation. Sorry, that's going to take you a lot longer than it took me. So there's my equation. I'm going to label again my triangle, and I'll use blue this time. And I think I'm going to label the sides differently for you, the angles. You're saying, why did you do that? It would have been easier the other way. Because sometimes they label them for you. Okay, now my formula says cos A, but I'm not really finding A, I'm finding C. So what I can do is I can rearrange my formula so it says cos of C equals. Now, no problem doing that. I just have to remember that I'm going to be subtracting C squared on the top. Okay, so if I have that, cos of C, I'm subtracting C squared. So I have A squared left, and I have, that's a squared, which looks not very good like a square. So I have A squared plus B squared, and then on the bottom, I'm going to have 2, and it's going to be the first 2 that I added together on the bottom. Okay, so it's not that difficult to rearrange the formula like that. So now it's just a matter of substituting information in again. I'm going to switch back to my writing pen. And My a this time is 9, so I have 9 squared plus my b, which is 5 squared, minus 8 squared, and it's all over 2 times 9 times 5. Again, really watch if you're using your calculator. Calculate the top first and then the bottom before you do your dividing. Less chance of making an error that way. So when we do that, we have 81 and we're subtracting 25. Sorry, we're adding 25. Just told you. Okay, so I'm going to delete that and I'm going to insert a plus. And now I'm going to subtract 64. So that's my top numbers. So I end up with 42 on the top. So let's get our 42. And now we're going to calculate the bottom. So we have 2 times 5, which is 10 times 9, which is 90. Now what do I do with that? Well, cos of c equals that, so I need to change that to a decimal in order to calculate the ratio. So 42, and we're dividing that by 90, so we end up with 4.6 repeating. So again, I need to have 4 decimal places to be accurate for an angle. So 0 decimal, and again, I talk and I forget. 4, 6. 4, 6 repeating, so 6, 6, round it to 7. So I'm going to find now my angle C, and the way I do that, remember, is I have to take the cos inverse, and I'm actually going to write the whole lovely thing down for you. 667. And when we do that on our calculator, I'm just going to clear everything so you just have a blank screen. Second cos decimal 4667. So we end up with 62.2. So 66.2, 62.2, and it is degrees. Okay, so that gives you a rundown of the main items in this unit. So what we've done is we've done the cosine law, the sine law. So those were new this year. You also did SOHCAHTOA again, using side length for finding side lengths and angles, as well as finding just basic angles given a ratio and finding ratios given an angle. So the main new things are the 2 laws. Now, also what we didn't do is we didn't talk about word questions, but obviously you know they're also involved. So what you're going to do for the remainder of the class is you have to do the unit assessment. So redo the test. If you are having difficulty with a question, make sure that you start, because the chances are that's the question I'll ask on the final exam. Also, yesterday you didn't have very much time to complete the other assessments as well. Make sure that you keep all your review information together, and that you decide what kind of information you're going to put on your help sheet. Remember, you're allowed to put examples on as well. So what I've tried to do with this review is to give you an example of a couple different items that you might see. Okay, so make sure that you're working on those assessments, because you really do not have tons of time for review.